Good evening and welcome to another monthly Beyond Zero Emissions discussion group. We'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting on the land of the Kulin Nations and pay our respects to their elders, past and present. We'd like to thank the University of Melbourne Energy Institute, the MEI, our Zero Carbon Australia project partners for this great venue. For anyone that hasn't been to one of our discussion groups before, Beyond Zero Emissions is a climate solutions think tank and research organisation. Our goal is to transform Australia from a 19th century fossil fuel-based economy to a 21st century renewable-powered clean tech economy. Our projects include Zero Carbon Australia research, Repower Australia talks, media work, education programs and much more. We're always looking for more volunteers, so come and talk to us afterwards if you'd like to get involved. This discussion group is a forum for climate change solutions with presentations by experts in their field and is held on the first Monday of every month. Tonight, we extend a warm welcome to Luke Osborne, who is visiting us from Canberra. Luke has had several international executive positions in the electricity industry, including spending 10 years with wind farms, and is now Director and Chief Operating Officer at Reposit Power, which is an ARENA-funded Canberra startup. Reposit software allows households to actively trade with their electricity provider, ensuring that they get the best value out of their solar and energy storage systems. Luke is a long-time supporter of BZE and has appeared regularly on BZE radio since he was working on wind farm projects at Wind Labs. We're delighted to have him join us in person tonight. Would you please welcome Luke?
Thank you very much, Hugh, and thanks for BZE for having me along yet again. I know you've all been paying a lot of attention to what's going on in electricity, and I sincerely hope you don't think I've got all the answers, but we'll do our best. I'm hopeful that after tonight we can at least, together with some of your expertise, which I'm sure you have, understand a little bit more about what's going on and what the future might look like, particularly when it comes to a lot more storage in the grid, which is quite transformative. So we're going to start off by discussing the architecture of the system and why batteries are important. And then we're going to explore some of the new business models that we hear a lot about, and along the way explore perhaps Reposit's business model, which sits inside a very highly regulated system. So without further ado, this is going to go for about half an hour, and we've got, I think, a long discussion at the end, which I'm very much looking forward to. So we're living in a changing electricity world, and I thought I might highlight that by quoting Josh Frydenberg, which I don't generally do, but even Josh said that, this is very recently, he often says this, 100% of new grid-connected electricity generation in recent years has been renewables, and globally 235 billion was spent on renewables. And 8 out of the 12 most emissions-intensive power generators have closed in the last 5 years. They have all been coal. So if you were looking from space, you would think that a lot is changing, and these Australians are going pretty hard at changing their system. And I know down here in the middle of it, it's very stop-start and we get frustrated with it, but in reality there is quite a big change going on. So what we're seeing is increasingly large amounts of renewable generation, and as we heard, I used to work in wind farms, so I can say firsthand that, you know, a lot of bulk energy is coming out of those wind farms now, and there's a lot more capacity there. Of course, we've got increasing demand side generation and participation, and a new house is vastly more, or a renovated house is vastly more energy efficient than an old one used to be. So we're seeing a lot of demand dropping as it looks from the system. Thermal plant retirements we talked about, but unfortunately some of those things, especially in the transition, can contribute to electricity market volatility and challenges for traditional network investment, but also challenges, I think, for incumbent retailers as well. So we're seeing a lot of that happening as well. So we're going to talk about the electricity system starting right back at the beginning, or the energy system starting right back at the beginning, but to do that I've got to admit to a dirty little secret, and that is that My family is English, and they ran this business, which was a coal distribution business. So it took coal from the mines and dropped it into people's bunkers. So little trucks, steam trucks running around delivering this in southeast England. So what my forebears were really the first power line. So they took energy from a mine and deposited it in people's houses. And the houses, of course, shoveled the coal into their hearths, and they were controlled. So we had an uncontrolled mine. It was just digging up whenever the weather was good or the seam was good, and controlled residences or users at the end. So that's the way it started around the time of the Industrial Revolution. So in the beginning of the grid itself, we decided it was a better idea to put the generators, of course, next to the coal mine, and we started controlling that. That was a controllable thing. We could turn the steam valves up and down and shovel more coal into it, and we let the end users go uncontrolled. They could just turn their kettles on whenever they wanted, and the fact that they were uncorrelated meant that they all summed up to being a nice curve that the controlled guys could follow, and that was great until we worked out that we had a problem with our atmospheric chemistry, and then started to try to change this. So the way we first changed it was by adding big-ish wind farms in particular, but sometimes solar farms and other things, wave farms, to the transmission grid. And they, of course, are uncontrolled. They go up and down with the wind, which ultimately is controlled by the sun. So what we're doing is we're asking the controlled guy, the thermal guy, to ramp up and down, not only with the uncontrolled houses, but also the uncontrolled wind farms. And you can see that power station's puffing a bit of smoke there. It's trying to follow the now lower but more volatile signal. We get up to today, which is where we've got a lot of little generators down here at the end of the grid on the distribution system, and they're uncontrolled too. They just go up and down with the sun, but they also have this sort of unfortunate characteristics from a systems control point of view, in that they're correlated and all go up and down at the same time, at least in the geographic area. Which makes it even harder for our friend up there, the thermal generator, to follow, the only controlled guy in the system, and take him to an extreme that can result in high prices as we get into situations where there's gaps. Now we're just entering now, really only since February, when the Powerwalls and LG systems and so forth became generally available, that was storage a real thing in the market. There was a bit before that, but really, in my experience, it wasn't until February that people worked out how to install a battery, and you could actually get one and go and buy one easily if you wanted one. So batteries are going in pretty fast, and most of them are also uncontrolled, in that they're controllable, but they have no control system which allows them to know what's going on upstream. So now we have these little generators down here at the end of the grid which are still uncontrolled and still correlated, so the batteries tend to behave in a similar way, particularly around tariffs. They have clocks in them. 7 a.m. and 10 p.m. are important time slots as we go on and off TOU tariffs, and those batteries will behave to the second around those tariffs. They have no awareness of what's going on, so we're now putting an even bigger strain on the controlled elements in our system. So it's like today, but possibly worse. And if you believe Energex, for instance, has done a study in this, and they claim that this kind of storage is uncontrolled. We're seeing COAG stepping in, trying to make a register. Everyone who buys a battery has to be on a register so that they can manage the potential stability effects that come from having storage, which I think is crazy, because a much better idea is transactive storage, which is where we make these guys down the bottom a controlled part of the grid so they can respond to price spikes, they can respond to the needs of the distribution system, they can monitor what's going on in the markets, in other words, and respond, so they become a controlled part of our system. So I think that's the next step, and really I would like COAG to think about how we get to this world rather than doing things like introducing storage registers. And this is what I hope is the future, and I think if we're really looking for 100% zero emissions electricity, this is what we're aiming for. Probably renewably, mostly out of control with the exception of the hydro dams, generation, and a controlled demand side. And it looks, if you think back to that original diagram with my ancestors carrying the coal down from the uncontrolled coal mine, it's very much back to the architecture that we started with the control being at the end of the distribution system. But hopefully we get there with a lot less smoke. So the next stage I want to talk about a little bit about peer-to-peer models. So the interesting thing about a house with a battery in it is it's got the ability to choose when it consumes energy, and it's got the ability to choose when it generates electricity, and that allows you to trade, and that's what Reposit allows you to do initially with your retailer, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but I think in future also with each other. So what's happening with, why would peer-to-peer be a thing? Obviously the rapid uptake of PV, so we've got lots of generation in the system. Some people can't have it, so we've got this mixture of people who are uncorrelated, so some people have an excess of energy and some don't have enough. And we've got the advances in batteries coupled with the sort of software systems that Reposit produces. And we've got increasing numbers of smallish, often community energy projects that are looking for someone to trade with. So they're trying to have a direct relationship with a customer base, and if that customer base has batteries, then that's wonderful. And we've got the ICT revolution going on, of course, so the transaction costs of managing sort of micro transactions is rapidly falling. So what would have been cost prohibitive in a billing sense only a few years ago is now quite accessible. So here are the actors that we've got to think about when we think about business models in this space. So you've got a network who obviously carries the electricity around in poles and wires, transformers and so forth. You've got a small renewable generator, so that's maybe a community project that's got an interest in transacting with prosumers and consumers. Prosumer, of course, is someone who can produce and consume electricity, and lots of us are already that with solar panels, but when you've got a battery, you're an even more capable prosumer. Consumer is the traditional consumer, and a retailer is someone authorised by the regulator to transact with the rest of the market, so buy bulk energy. Purely an accounting trick, really, but you're buying energy from the market and you're distributing it to consumers. That all makes sense. So if we think about someone with a solar panel, you've got the rest of the market. The prosumer can't generate everything they use. They get top-up energy from their retailer, and of course the consumer gets all of their energy from the retailer. So it's fairly common. We also see these transactions where it's spilled solar, so solar that you can't consume yourself goes back to that retailer, and that retailer will go out and issue PPAs to small renewable generators, which are hard things to come by, but that would be a fairly common model. So we work a lot with Diamond Energy, who do exactly that. Now with a battery, we can also deliver firm energy back to this retailer. So what's been going on in, say, Tasmania and South Australia and even other states is much more volatility here, and when the price spikes here, you can get your firm energy not from this side or from that guy, you can get it from the customer base. So that's really what we're seeing today as at least Reposit's business model. So if you buy a battery with a Reposit software system on it, you can transact with that retailer who will sell you your top-up energy. You can sell back your firm energy when prices are high. And hopefully, if you've got a battery, you have no solar spill. That's your goal. You don't want to spill it. You want to use it all yourself. But sometimes you inevitably, in summer perhaps, you have too much energy, so that spills back to the retailer. It's becoming less and less attractive in the market, that spilled, uncontrolled solar. It's just all rushes in at the wrong time of day. It's not very valuable. So we at Reposit try to minimise that and make sure most of it goes into your house. Now, the first element of peer-to-peer that we might see, I suspect, is this one, where instead of your spilled energy going to your retailer, who really doesn't want it because it's not that valuable, because it's all rushing in an uncontrolled, unfirm way in the middle of the day, you can nominate someone who you like, your friend, to receive your excess solar energy. And really all that takes is a good billing system that knows, can track prosumers' excess generation and track that against consumers' generation. So that's something that we're working on at Reposit, and I think something that will be available very soon. So you'll be asked, hey, your phone app might pop up with, hey, looks like you're wasting some solar. Would you like to give it to somebody? And you might give it to your friend or your mother or some charity that you like.
Why would the retailer agree to that?
Because it's viral. So that you nominate someone who's not on that retailer, then they've now got an incentive to join that retailer. So that'd be the main reason. Yeah. Which is not usual in electricity. We haven't really seen very many viral products. So. Another thing we're hearing a lot about is the concept of a demand-side operator, which is something that would run at the network level, and what that would do is set a dynamic price that says, right now the network is about to melt, it's reaching its peak capacity, or I've got some maintenance going on, so I've changed my topology and I'm really starting to run out of capacity on a particular piece of grid. So we can set these demand tariffs that incentivise customers in the right spot, in the right geographic area, to start exporting just at the right time. So we're doing a big trial over in Adelaide, and another one on Bruny Island, and another one up at Port Macquarie, all looking at this kind of thing. And I think Arena's looking to fund a trial, and where we're using consumer-owned equipment, these very small batteries with solar panels, very capable little power stations. We're using those to augment the grid instead of building new poles and wires or putting in new transformers. And it tends to be a good idea financially to do that, because the customers are putting the batteries in predominantly to get an arbitrage to move their solar from the morning to the evening, and this kind of activity, and even selling the firm energy back there, is a marginal thing, something that you can do on top of your principal reason for doing it. So it tends to be very cheap for society to solve problems this way, and much more capital effective for all of the players. Another model that we're starting to hear a lot about is these small renewable generators having a direct relationship with the prosumer. So instead of getting your top-up energy from the grid, which might come ultimately from a dirty source if you're here in Australia, still most of our energy comes from emissions-intensive generators. You might want to say, well, I like that little plant down the road that my local community set up. So when I need top up, I'll have it from that particular one, please. And this is a model that a company called Vanderbron's using in Holland, where they're linking up farms. There's a lot of piggeries and things over there which generate gas that can be converted to electricity. We can have direct relationships between those farmers and consumers. So that's a good model, particularly where that small renewable generator is not another solar farm, which would be obviously correlated producing energy at the same time as the prosumer. And this is where it gets really confusing, but we virtualize the retailer. So I'm sure some people in this room are looking at blockchain, the technology that underpins Bitcoin, but a method of doing transactions in a completely decentralized way. So in this case, we use a technology like that to do decentralized transactions, all contained, if you like, in a black box, and that transacts with the network and with the rest of the market. So I think we're a little bit away from this because it's, in a regulatory sense, a long way from where we are today. But I think certainly on the horizon, we might see this, and it would be represented, I think, as something like my suburb has its own energy co-op, if you like. It might not even be financially based, the transactions in it. You might just set up some rules, and once you've joined, all transactions within that thing are free. So a true sort of commons architecture. And if you're interested, I'd recommend you read Jeremy Rifkin's work on zero marginal cost economies. So in those economies where things fall to zero marginal cost, so it costs nothing to produce another unit, and that happens in renewables. It doesn't cost you anything to produce another unit of electricity. We get to this scenario where capitalism starts to struggle because you can't make a profit on something that doesn't cost anything. So we've seen it already happen with software. There's a zero cost of producing our licensing software, and so a lot of the sort of capitalist models broke down. We returned to a very traditional model for economic organisations, which is the commons, and software is often done on open source software is done on a commons model, where it's more about the rules and what you do with what you develop, how you develop it, how you share what you do, and Rifkin makes the point that we might see this occurring in energy as well, which will lead not to a shortage of electricity, as many people think, but perhaps an abundance of it, where we've just got so much we don't know what to do with it all. And I tend to think that's right when you see our customers anyway. They do tend to have lots of energy. As batteries fall, they've got the ability to use that whenever they like, or exchange it much more freely than they do today. We'll take quite a different model with the network. So right now networks have what I call treacle on trading, which is they charge you per kilowatt hour to move energy around. That's a real disincentive to move it, and is like a treacle that's sort of slowing everything down and making it harder to do anything. So when networks move more to a capacity, a pure capacity charge, so you just charge to be on the network, you might be a big user, big, medium or small user, then you've got a lot of freedom to do whatever you want after you do that. And my phone's like that, so I pay $70 a month and I've got a lot of freedom. Once we move to those kind of tariffs, I think you'll see a lot more opportunity for this kind of model. And just one slide, I wasn't going to bore you too much with Reposit, but we were established originally back in 2011 and really got going in 2013 with the vision that we would originally make batteries work hard so that they were cost effective. And that meant we weren't just using them for the obvious thing, which is charging from solar and discharging back into the house in the morning and evenings, but we were going to stack on top of that the ability to do ancillary services, so detect when the grid frequency goes above or below 50 hertz, and trade wholesale energy and do this kind of network support work that we were talking about earlier. Just going to check on this one. So what we found along the way with Reposit is that we had to be a lot more consumer friendly. So we thought when we started, and if you look back on our earlier days, and I'm sure you can find some stuff on the internet, we were much more business to business in our branding and our language, and we found that wasn't going to work, and we had to start talking straight to consumers and convincing consumers that when they bought a battery they should add this piece of software. We talked earlier about the importance of that. So what we make is software for solar and battery owners who want the lowest possible bill with the highest level of sustainability. And so what we're trying to do is say to people, by chasing the lowest possible bill and using your very capable small power station for as many uses as possible, you're also going to be green. So what's good for you is also good for our system. And in doing that, I hope we won't see the sort of things we've been seeing recently on our system, which is obviously poor resilience. So in Tassie we lost Basslink, and in South Australia we've just lost transmission lines. Once we get more of this kind of technology, we're much less vulnerable to those kind of things, and we're much more able to accept intermittent generators onto our grid. So that was all I wanted to cover in the formal part anyway. I look forward to having a more in-depth discussion with you.
So do you basically just control when the battery is being charged and discharged to maximise the value, or do you do other things like activate the hot water service when they got access?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we started doing the control. So what it does is it will predict your solar, so it'll learn about how your particular solar panel produces. So if it's got shading and so forth, it'll learn about that. It takes into account weather models, so it's got this look ahead on your solar. It also learns your consumption patterns, so it's got a bit of a look ahead on what you're going to consume, and we can manage the battery according to that. And then if we know about there might be a market event in the afternoon, often these things are somewhat predictable, the battery will prepare itself for that. And it's always looking for the best financial thing to do with your battery, so it's a financial optimizer that's working that out. As we've gone more and more out there into the market, when people have batteries, they're all about the self-consumption ratio. So ideally, you get 100% of your energy from your own roof. And to do that, you need to start moving your consumption into the middle of the day and sort of building batteries out of your hot water heaters and your pools and your HVAC systems. So increasingly, we've been called upon to switch people's loads on and off as well in order to improve that ratio. So we are doing a lot of work in that area, and hopefully we'll have sort of generally available products in that area fairly soon.
Yeah, air conditioners seem to me to be under control and also correlated. Do you have any comment on that? Because it just seems to me they're criticising generation, that they're not criticising the consumption, which seems to be...
Yeah, there was a lot of... I remember there was a big lot of talk about it a few years ago when someone worked out for every air conditioner, which might cost $1,000, there was something like $13,000 of grid augmentation required. But yeah, I agree, it's sort of fallen off the agenda a little bit. I'm not an expert in it, but my colleagues have looked into it. Well, I mean, I firstly agree with you, like you get a very peaky load pattern out of them. In terms of controlling them, it all comes down to the time constant of what you're controlling. So if it's got, if the temperature in your house moved around slowly, and you could pre-cool the house several hours before you want it to be cool, then it will work. But in general terms, the heat leaks out, or the heat comes in so fast that you can't really do a lot about it. So I suspect humans being what they are, we're going to have to find ways of making their houses as insulated as possible, and then building the system around the fact that they're all going to turn their air conditioners on at the same time. Yeah.
If your battery was empty and in the middle of the night, would Reposit charge it on night tariffs?
Yep, so we do that every day. Like on a day like today where it's cloudy, it would most certainly do it. So it would predict the fact that it was cloudy and pre-charge it. In winter, it tends to happen every day because the solar day is contracted right into the middle of the day, and people's time of use tariffs often start at 7 a.m, not always, but often. And so what the behaviour you'll often see is a pre-charge that'll stop your meter as soon as peak tariffs start up, and your battery's supplying you for those couple of hours, perhaps until the sun comes up. Then you'll be supplied by sun, which is also charging the battery as fast as it can go. And then when the sun goes down, you'll see it stop your meter again. Ideally, you never buy anything from in the peak period, and the energy you do buy is the cheaper stuff overnight. I suspect in future you'll also see these super cheap tariffs. So if you know much about the wholesale market, it can go negative, so you can be paid to consume, and it makes sense for all these batteries to charge up at those times. So I suspect you'll see a lot more of that kind of activity as we get these better grid credit plans, as we call them. These are plans that you buy a battery and you go on one of these plans from one of our partners. I suspect you'll see a lot more innovation in those plans. Today they're fairly simple products that are built on the platform.
Which systems are compatible now with your systems?
Yeah, that's a good question. So what actually goes in your house is what we call a Reposit box. So this is one of our customers, Nick. You can't quite see it, but just behind his shoulder there's a little box on the wall. That's our Reposit box. And what that does is it treats the inverter like a slave. It tells the inverter what power setting to have at any one time. So between that box and the inverter, which is behind his head, there's a software driver that we write. And to add new ones, we need to write new drivers against the COM spec for each inverter. That happens to be a Solar Edge one, an Israeli inverter. So mostly at the moment we're supporting Tesla Powerwalls, that battery there, and LG systems. You can also get Samsung. We're working on a number more, which will be announced soon. But the bulk of the market has been Tesla and LG. They've been the best value for money products, and nearly all our sales, and I think sales generally, are one of those two units.
So batteries at the moment, from a consumer perspective, aren't that economic. You make them more economic. Have you got a rough rule of thumb as to how you change the economics? To what proportion do you change the economics?
We claim an average halving of the payback period on the battery, but there is a lot of variation in that, and I'd encourage people to sort of think it through carefully themselves. But the variables in that are where do you live geographically, so how much can you help the network. If you're in an area like Salisbury, where we're working in South Australia, then you can get payback period of probably a year in the case of those customers, very short. If you happen to live in a very strong part of the network, then that component's helping you less. If you live on a volatile grid with a volatile price, so South Australia's been very volatile lately, then again you can get a shorter payback period. And the third market we engage in is ancillary services. So this box behind Nick's shoulder is constantly monitoring the grid frequency. There's a market for that called ancillary services, and particularly contingency ancillary services is the one this battery participates in. So what that market does is you bid, you get paid for being ready if your bid's accepted, and then as soon as you see the frequency deviate above or below 50 hertz, you step in and act to move it back towards 50 hertz. So it's this like automatic correction engine in case supply and demand is mismanaged by the energy market. So these batteries all do that, so they're all autonomously monitoring that. And that market's been very good lately, so again, shortening the payback period considerably.
So how dependent is all of this on your continual operation? In other words, if you go out of business in 3 years, will this survive or?
Yeah, I mean, we're certainly not planning to do that. What we're doing is the Reposit model is to be battery agnostic, and what that means is we have an external energy management system, this Reposit box behind your shoulder, and so you can simply unplug that and go back to the native control system that's inside the inverter. It's not nearly as advanced, but it will work. So that's your first thing, and the second thing is the Reposit box is an autonomous optimizer. It does not need to be necessarily connected to our back end to do most of its job. It certainly needs to be connected to the back end to make trades, but the basic learning algorithm and solar predictions and things like that, it does all autonomously.
Sorry to interrupt, but
That's okay.
it's kind of relevant. After what Josh Frydenberg and his friends have been saying over the last few days with the South Australia problem, where he was talking frequency when I was expecting to hear voltage or something like this, raises my question. You've just referred to frequency. Is variation in frequency that good an indicator of what the condition of the distribution system is?
So what frequency is used for is a supply-demand indicator. So we've got the big generators are turning around and they're producing a 50 hertz sine wave. And what we're trying to do is keep them running at constant velocity. And they've got inertia, they're big, huge things, and they don't like changing. And so they tend to resist changes of frequency themselves. But if we suddenly get a loss of load, and say a big factory goes off or a transmission line with a lot of load on it goes off, you'll see those machines start to speed up, and you let that go to its natural conclusion. They run off across the field, right? And they'll do the other. Slowing them down is not great either. So what happened in South Australia, so we've got the frequency traces from batteries like this, so it's a system global thing. So what happens in South Australia affects the whole of the NEM. So we can see it happening in New South Wales as well. So what we saw happen there was a big frequency dip. So everything, because what happened there was the wind blew down transmission towers, cut off some of the generators, so they weren't able to generate anymore. So now we had a supply-demand imbalance with a lack of generation. So that would be indicated by a slowing of frequency. So everything starts going slowing down. And what you get in a catastrophic event like that is you get one slowing down, and then the next one going, oh, I can't stay on anymore, I'm about to tear out of my bearing, so he drops off, and then you get this domino effect. And they let that go right through South Australia, but they cut South Australia free, so it didn't keep dragging down the rest of the grid. So what we saw in the actual frequency traces, and I probably should have brought one along, but it dipped and then it oversped. So then it went, as they dropped South Australia, the rest of the market oversped, and there was a fair bit of time where it went way high, and then they managed to drag it back before we lost the rest of the grid. But it was quite an interesting event. But I think genuinely nothing to do with renewables in that case. It would have happened regardless. But with more of these batteries in South Australia, I'm not sure that it would have happened. If we had 10,000 nicks there, they all would have been acting to stabilise it, and we might not have gone on this runaway.
And they can react quickly.
Yeah, so these all react. So you've got to react the fast service, as it's called, fast FCAS, fast contingency. You've got to react within 6 seconds, and these can do it sort of more like 1 second. So they're very fast, bi-directional, capable little generators. Just very much like a hydro dam is if you add thousands of nicks together, which we do in an aggregation layer called Reposit Marketplace, they look very much to the system like a hydro dam. Can't go for very long, but can do it very fast and can do it both directions.
Yeah, talking of stability, how possible is it to know in advance that a system that's as decentralised as the one that you envisage without any centralised network controller will be as stable and as reliable as the one we have today?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not a controls engineer, so I will caveat this that I don't know too much about it, but I think diversity in these things tends to engender more stability, particularly perhaps if we can get diversity in generation types, so we're not all solar. I think the notion that everything should be solar, and we should have solar farms and solar roofs, that's probably a little naive, but if we can add more generation sources in, so wind for a start, but other things too, biomass perhaps, wave power or whatever we can get on, the more diversity we've got, the more stable we'll get, and the more control we can get in there, which as I was talking about earlier, the better. So more things can ramp up and down. Yep, the back.
Well, rapidly discharging and charging a battery obviously decreases the life of your battery long term. Is that up to the prosumer to weigh that risk, or is that advised by the software, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's a good question, and in particular, some of these chemistries hate being at full charge or zero charge, so there's a cost. Often there's a cost to doing a cycle no matter what you do, because they wear out, if you like. They've got a finite number of cycles, and there's certainly a cost to being at the top and bottom depending on the chemistry. So what we do is we put a financial you put that into the financial engine, if you like. So anytime I'm going to take an action, I've got to be sure it's going to overcome the cost of doing it, because this battery will its life will be a little bit shorter for doing it. We do have a method of staying within the manufacturer's warranty. So this Powerwall, for instance, allows you to do, I think, 18 megawatt hours through it. So they allow you a certain amount of capacity through it. So we do try to respect those warranties. Yep.
I'm just trying to understand exactly how this is working. You're saying that you bid something back to the back end which says, I will be available to try this balancing load, and then when where do you get your money? Only if you called on to fix it, or?
No, that's a good question. So we're used to in this country in what's called an energy market, so you get paid for delivery of kilowatt hours. But there are markets called capacity markets, which are for standby kilowatts, so power on standby. And our ancillary market is the latter type. So we've got an energy market which is based on kilowatt hours or megawatt hours, and we've got an ancillary market which is based on being ready to do something. So you can get paid for doing absolutely nothing, and most of the time you do get paid for doing nothing. And Snowy Hydro earns a hell of a lot of its revenue this way. So what we do in practice is we say, Nick here has about a 3 kilowatt unit there. It can do about 3 kilowatts in power. It can store 6.4 kilowatt hours, so it can store about 2 hours worth of full charge or discharge. What we say is got 3 kilowatts available, and we know in advance, because we've plotted ahead what that battery is going to do. We've predicted ahead what it's going to do. So in the future we can say at any particular point he can charge at 3 kilowatts or he can discharge at 3 kilowatts, and what we do is we put all the nicks together, and we produce what's called a bid file that goes into the market operator, and the market operator says, "Yep, you're accepted. You're on standby for each of these 5-minute slots." And then if you see the frequency deviate during those 5-minute slots when you're armed, you must act, and they audit whether or not you acted in accordance with your bid.
Can you also then act on the load market by saying, I will either generate or shed to meet need? And also turn on devices to reduce load, or turn off devices. Can you market that functionality from it?
Yeah. So you're talking now sort of derivatives and swaps and things like that. So there's a lot of financial instruments in here to manage financial risk of the markets. And what you're talking about is putting them over here, which is exactly the sort of thing we're trying to do. So you can be paid to be on standby as an insurance product in case the market goes very high. They're often called caps in the market. So there's a lot of generators say that never really turn on. They're just like dirty, basic open cycle gas turbines that hardly ever turn on, but they still can earn quite a lot of revenue because people are scared that the price might go high, so they're willing to pay them to sit there and be ready.
But couldn't you also buy power from the grid and put it into the batteries and then sell it back in later?
Yeah, you can do that. Yeah. So I explain when I want to be really simple about it. It's about buying low, buying as cheap as possible, holding in the middle, so going off grid whenever you can, and when it's sensible, sell high. So those are the only, those in any market, those are what you're trying to do: buy low, sell high, and look after yourself in the middle. That's all it's about, and we just try and find as many opportunities to buy low and sell high as possible for our customers.
But if just working on the two tariffs that the user works, that's not terribly profitable.
No.
You could get back into the next level where it's far more volatile. Surely you could make a thought.
Yeah, so out here, we're normally moving between, 25 and 30 cents a kilowatt hour. This market moves from -100 to $14 a kilowatt hour. So this is a couple of orders of magnitude more volatile than anything we see out here. In a regulatory sense, there's someone in the middle. It's this guy. It's a retailer. So the retailer's really the one who has to open up exposure to this volatility. So right now we have a product in the market called the GridCredits 100. And so what Diamond Energy, who has that product, is saying to a prosumer, every time this goes high, I'm going to buy this energy for 100 cents a kilowatt hour, which is a good deal, right? There's never been a generator contract like it, I don't think, in the market, so it's a really good price. But it could be even more exciting because there's a whole lot more exciting stuff going on down here. The price is going below zero, it's going up to $14. So I think in future there's a lot of opportunity to make these kind of products much more exciting, where you'll be able to, fill up your battery in as fast as it'll go when prices are really low, when there's an excess of wind power or solar, and sell back for much more money when this goes really high.
At the moment, there's generally an excess of available production, so we've got surplus production.
Yep.
I would have thought that would very adversely affect the economics of your situation.
Yeah,
so not getting many peaks.
Yeah, so that's been true, not so much in South Australia, but it's certainly true in Vic and in New South Wales, and not so much in Queensland. So we're seeing more volatility in those markets where supply and demand is much more balanced. So I think it would be good for us for more thermal plant to retire. I think it'd be good for our customers at least. But what we are seeing, generally speaking, as we're moving to more renewables, is that bulk kilowatt hours, so bulk energy, is worth less and less because it's coming from the sky for free. But what's more and more valuable are these short, sharp, sort of 5-minute bursts, and this is what this power station's really good at doing. So I would expect, again, I'm no prophet here, but I would expect that energy prices will stay on average low, but we will see more peakiness in them. It's So more negatives and more big positives, generally flat in the middle. Yep, up the back.
How much of the smarts is in the reposit box on the wall versus in the cloud?
Yeah, that's another great question. So the problem with doing any sort of control over the internet, and again, I'm parroting my colleagues here, but control of the internet's not a great idea because the internet's not a reliable communication platform. The internet's designed to be intermittent itself. So if we're trying to do something inside 1 second, for instance, there's no way that you can reliably do that across the internet because of latency. So what we do is put most of the smarts at your house. It's optimised around you. It's very much about the individual, and the centralised system's really about serving up your phone. So we produce a phone app, which you can come and have a look at later if you like, but it tells you what's going on at your house. That's all coming off the back end, obviously, not talking directly to your house, and also all these sort of updates about markets and contracts, and someone's bought energy from you, all that update's coming over the internet. Does that make sense? Yeah, right up the back.
The retailer in a volatile market takes a lot of risk. In the energy prices. What you're proposing is taking the role of the retailer, smaller role of the retailer, and passing some of the risk. So what risk will be exposed to the consumers?
Yeah, that's, I think, a really good question. So if you get this wrong, it's great to be able to sell at $14 a kilowatt hour, but it's pretty bad to buy it at that price. And so there is a risk element here. And what we're talking about is a risk balance between this guy and the prosumer. So all a retailer really is a risk manager and a billing system. That's really all they are. A retailer that passes through spot, as we call it. So passing through spot, you see this in commercial and industrial contracts. They will do it. They'll say every time I'll sell energy to you at 105% of the spot price. So put a 5% margin on this, and I'll buy it back from you at 95%. So I'll take another 5% on the way back in. So I'm taking no risk under that model, and the prosumer's taking it all. And so if you're going to take any sort of risk, you're going to want to make sure you've got the right equipment at your house. So you've got to have a good battery, a good solar panel, and a good control system to run it. But we don't need to go right to the end of that risk spectrum. We can start to go a little bit. And so where we are at the moment is the least possible risky. We're giving this prosumer the upside to sell back when prices are high, and we can start to edge our way as we get more confident towards a situation where we're saying the technology is so good that prosumer is really not taking as much risk as we might otherwise be.
So with the current plans, there's no risk to the consumer other than the buying in the first place. On the plans that are there, they can only... No,
there's only upside. There's only upside. Upside, yeah. That's a good question. Yeah.
With the current plans that say $1 a kilowatt hour, unless you've got a huge home battery, you're not looking at more than a few dollars in any one sort of, if it's selling at a high sort of market event. Yeah. How often, just ballpark figures, say somewhere like Central Melbourne, a pretty reliable area, how often would you be able to capitalise from that, do you think?
Yeah, it's always a bit fraught predicting. This year there's been quite a few events. There's been dozens and dozens in South Australia. I can't really quote you the big ones at the moment, but there's probably been about 30 odd in Queensland. So they're happening reasonably often. You're not going to retire on this income. It's about grabbing all those small transactions which add up over time. As I say, I think if we can get people to do this, the marginal cost of buying this software over and above buying your batteries, hardly anything. You may as well do it. That little box will pay itself off in no time, and in doing so we can get to this 100% renewable dream that we're talking about. So really it's almost a no-brainer to buy some decent software when you buy your power station. Otherwise, it's going very underutilised.
And what sort of cost would
Sorry.
I hate to ask this, but from an accountant's point of view, if you then converted the household into an income-earning business,
Yes.
and have you had any feedback from the ATO? Since Reposit is based in Canberra from recollection, you just next door now. Is that
I don't know you get any favours for living in Canberra.
how do you tax treat this?
Yeah, I mean, to my knowledge...
Can you, for instance, are you entitled to have a tax write-off of the battery system?
Well, maybe we should talk. I think that's another whole area, I think, I think accountants could really have a lot of fun with this, because what we're talking about is turning capital...
I can't even count six. What's the ATO saying?
Well, with feed-in tariffs, which are kind of similar, they didn't deem it as taxable income. I don't know whether they would treat what we call GridCredits, these controlled controlled exports, any differently. No one, to my knowledge, is sort of ruling on it yet, so we're just relying on the sort of precedent set by solar feed-in tariffs. But it would, there could be some real upside for them treating it as income, because you could write it off. And a lot of our customers are looking for. There tend to be older people looking to put money into their homes, and particularly into their homes in a way that saves them on future bills, because they're moving into this retirement phase. So I'm not an accountant, so I'm not an expert in all that, but there could well be good accounting reasons for doing this, particularly when you're in that phase of life.
Would someone in Victoria currently in receipt of the premium feed-in tariff
Yes.
have an incentive to use it?
No.
That's for sure.
Unless it's a very small system.
Yes. If you want to add a second bigger system on, or augment that, you could do so. There's talk in the market about governments buying back feed-in tariffs. So what they do, unfortunately, they're a very good instrument to promote a new industry and get people to open their wallets and put a lot of solar in, and Reposit really enjoys the legacy of that today. We've got a very capable distribution system that can put batteries into people's homes, but the feed-in tariffs have a downside in that they lock people out of buying batteries. It's a disincentive to buy batteries, because really the best thing to do if you're on a feed-in tariff is to feed it in as hard as you can go. And really with a battery, what we're trying to do is feed in as little as possible, the opposite. And I hope the governments will recognise as a win-win here, where we can get some of those customers, we can buy out the future liability that the government's got, give that money as a lump sum to the customer if they buy a battery, so that we can unlock that innovation and start to move the grid more in this direction.
Is that happening anywhere? I heard it's happening in Queensland.
Yeah, well, certainly I know I'm much more in touch with the ACT government for obvious reasons, and they're certainly seriously considering it. Marchmont Hill, which is a consultancy, I think based here, have been doing some reporting on it and looking at the economics of doing it, which is a win for everyone. It's a win for the networks. They get better. They get a better result, they get less solar instability in their networks. It's a win for the consumer, and it's a win for the government, because they can presumably buy these out at a discount. So I'm certainly a supporter, and I think we should all support that notion.
I'd like to come back to the gentleman's comment about the fact that what we're getting with the Reposit Power model is $1 here and $1 there on the odd basis. This perception of just $1 here and $1 there is just that, a perception. If you talk to people about what they pay as the standing charge per day, it's only $1 here or $1 there, but they'll get up in arms about it. So the $1 here and $1 there actually has value.
Yeah, and if we can get $1 here and $1 there, and cancel out your daily charge, and that we can get you to the point where your energy is netted off by the amount that you put back in versus the small amount you have to buy, we can get you to a zero bill. So as I was looking up, I've got a customer here, and I don't know who it is, which we treat our privacy seriously here, but we'll look at it later. But so far in October, he's spent minus $1.80, and I'll just have a look at the month before if I can. There we go. So September, he spent minus $9.66. And in August, which is winter, he spent $9.96. So, these are pretty good results. And Nick there went from a bill of $500 to a bill of $50 for the same period. So there's quite, the customers are getting quite good results, even though we're still early days on this, obviously.
Is it a viable proposition if your business and your home are both used during the day? So, in other words, we run a business
Yeah, that's
home,
a good question,
but
yeah.
my business that I'm setting up is actually a daytime business with high energy usage.
Yeah, so if you can put a solar system in and use it when you're generating, that's really the best thing you can do. So a lot of businesses,
the system has no value, really.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to look at that, how much you need to shift, right? So how much is happening, how much are you buying from the grid that's not happening during those solar? Have you got excess solar that you could shift from the middle of the day to the excess? And that's about battery sizing. So the expensive thing here is the battery, and you've got to size it correctly. Once you put it in, the little Reposit box will do the best it can with whatever you've put in. But generally speaking, the reason why we're seeing Australian residences go for batteries before we're seeing businesses is for precisely this reason, because most people aren't home during the day and they're putting solar systems in and they're getting a woeful result because they're getting nothing really for the exports.
The idea of this whole system sort of helps solve the day-to-day problem of power being generated from day to day. It does nothing to solve the problem where we generate lots of power, renewable power in summer and minimal in winter. Can you see any solution to that problem?
Well, yeah.
Wind is everywhere, right?
Yeah, wind tends to be really anti-correlated with solar. So wind, especially if you move inland, tends to generate more at night than during the day, which, when I was developing wind farms was always a bit of pain because you got less for the power, but it actually works quite well from a systems point of view because it's anti-correlated with solar, and it does tend to blow a lot in winter as well. So wind is one answer. Obviously we've got quite a good small but good hydro system, and I do think that next generation, whether it's biomass or whatever it is, we do need something else beyond those to sort of keep us all balanced out. And certainly in a EMO study of a zero emissions grid, they looked at a lot of biomass in their study as the answer. So maybe it's that. But yeah, diversity is really important.
What sort of proportion of the income or the money that's generated by a typical system comes from energy shifting versus capacity availability versus ancillary services? Is it 80% the...
Yeah, I mean, so the network part of it's very geographically, so that's the most valuable thing you can do if you're in the right spot. So you see, like in the right part of Adelaide at the moment, you can buy a battery, you can buy a whole system for $5,000, including big solar system and batteries and everything all installed. So, you can see the network's putting in a lot of money to make that happen, to get it down from say 12 or 15 down to 5. So that's the most valuable thing you can do. Probably the next most valuable thing is all the behind the meter stuff. So all that arbitraging. The third most valuable thing would be ancillary services. That's worth quite a lot of money. And the last most valuable thing you can do at the moment is the wholesale trading, for the reasons we've talked about here, is it's our system is oversupplied with thermal generation at the moment, to quite a large extent. We really should be thinking about closing more. And I notice there is a talk of that now, that Hazelwood looks almost certain to close, which would be great next year at some point.
Has the number of prosumers you have changed your negotiating power with the market?
Our great. We're much more popular if we're popular with customers, and if we've got a lot of customers, and so you can see really that in our approach to the world, is we're spending a lot of time with consumers, quite a lot of time with networks. They're very important to us, and we think our relationship with them is really important. And we've only sort of more recently got to the retailers, so the retail plans based on this product are only just coming out now, and they're coming out based on the fact that a lot of consumers are out there buying our box when they buy a system. So if we're a bigger generator, we're certainly, our customers would have much more pull in the market to be able to write bigger contracts and better contracts, and that would be good.
How standards are developing in this regard? I mean, the peer-to-peer transaction on the network. So in Australia, because all of these issues are related to retailers, and retailers should have outbound regulations and is that, how far we are away from the realistically from this system?
Well, from where we are now, which is more like this one, we've built this to be compliant with the current rules. So you see there's products already based on that. So, but that isn't peer-to-peer. This one, there's no regulatory problem with doing it, other than you need a good billing system, and billing systems are notoriously hard to manage for, when you've got millions of customers, as these retailers often do. So we should see that one very shortly, I would imagine. This one again is not really not so much a regulatory thing, although the networks are highly regulated monopolies. But we'll see that coming, I think, in the next few years, where we've got this dynamic network price, if you like. The network price changes depending on the loading on the network in your particular area. There's nothing stopping you doing that one. This one, that one I think is quite a big step from where we are. Although you're starting to see, models even here in Australia, or businesses starting up around that concept. Certainly money's flowing towards that concept. As I say, at Reposit, we've stayed within the current rules, and we'd like to evolve with the rules, which are notoriously slow to change. But I would imagine that will be, I don't know, I don't even want to predict it. I'll look silly, but it could be sooner than we think.
Luke, did you say before that you'd managed with Nick to eliminate his standing fees, including only the energy fee?
Yeah, well, his latest bill, and he's published this, you can see on it, he runs a blog called Unleash the Powerwall. He's posted his bills on there, so you'll see that he had a bill of $50 for his most recent quarter, I think.
So the standing charge has gone for him?
Well, the cost between his standing charge and his energy was $50, so his net overall charge for energy was $50. He's got solar panels on his roof and the Powerwall and a Reposit box and that's managed to get his bill to, and his own behavioural change. He's changed his behaviour a fair bit, I've got to say. He's managed to get his bill from sort of $500-ish to $50, so it's a great effort.
Can you tell us about some of your highs and lows of getting your key messages to government to COO?
So I'd firstly say that as a company, we've been very, very well supported by our federal government. We started off with a Commercialisation Australia grant, which is now defunct. It's now become accelerating commercialisation. So that grant was very useful. We put a system on Infigen's solar project up near Canberra, so a battery on a solar farm. And that was already a market participant. It was fully exposed to that spot market we're talking about. And that was a great starting spot for us. We got our system proved up and tested. Then we got a grant from Arena to put this in homes around Canberra, which got us sort of in front of the customer and learning about what customers wanted. And we rapidly developed our apps and our installation methods and make it easy for electricians to put it in, all that sort of thing. So that's on the positive side. On the downside, I always see the probably the upside in people, but in reality, perhaps I shouldn't, because every time anything happens on the grid, we have this debate about renewables again, and we've just seen it in the last few days. I felt like punching the television the other night when you had all the experts saying, oh, this had nothing to do with renewables, and then you had all the politicians saying, oh yeah, that's because we've got too much wind in South Australia. And a lot of people are trying to prop up the old system the whole time, really I think for ideological reasons more than anything. And I find it personally slightly frustrating that something that's so simple, and the reason we're all in this room is there's what I call atmospheric chemistry problem, right? There's just, you can measure it. There's too much CO2 in the atmosphere and other gases that have a similar effect. And the notion that politics has anything to do with that is just crazy to me. But anyway, some of the stories. We've got a great hearing from the regulators, I've got to say. So the regulators in this area, the Australian Electricity Regulator, the AEMC, the Market Commission, and I guess you'd put the market operator in that camp too, and they've all spent a lot of time with us and are really trying to understand this. And I think, even right up to the standing commission and the COAG processes, they've paid a fair bit of attention to, what is what at least has been a fairly small company in Canberra. So I think all in all, I think I've been surprised at how good the reception has been to the notion of consumers having batteries. It's only just sort of recently where I've started to get concerned. I really don't like the idea of a storage register. It's probably not the end of the world, but I think, you don't have to register your fridge or your mobility scooter or your electric, your battery-powered power tools and stuff like that. Why are we reaching into people's homes and making them register their batteries? They're not unsafe. If we're asking ourselves the wrong question there. We're trying to limit the damage, but let's look at the upside. How do we make sure that these batteries do something good for our grid? How do we incentivise people to put the right software on them? I think that's the right question we should be asking ourselves.
What sort of cost is involved with the Reposit box and software?
It's about, depends a little bit on how many phases you've got at your house. So you have to put more meters on if you've got a 3-phase house. But you're looking at somewhere between $600 and $600, and if you've got a really complicated house, maybe $1,000 over and above what you'd pay for a standard system.
And then there's an ongoing charge?
No ongoing charge for the consumer. We charge the buyer a small fee to transact with the consumer, so we get an ongoing fee that way, but we don't charge the customer, just pays for it, it's their system, and they never have to pay again.
Look, how exportable is the Reposit system? How much change does it need to go to a different market, the US or the UK or the EU?
There are markets that are very close to our system, so Texas and South Korea are almost almost identical systems. So those are very simple for us, those kind of transitions. But generally speaking, the challenges you're seeing around the world are behind Australia. We've got very high solar installation, very high retail prices, and great history of prosumer kind of behaviour. So we're way ahead of this, I think, than than most parts of the world, but generally speaking, as we get those sort of conditions come about in the other markets, I think they'll be fairly similar looking products. So I'm very hopeful we'll be an international business at some point, very much focused on being here at the moment.
With the high volatility in South Australia, does that increase the likelihood that it is a prime market for the battery and reposit combination, or not?
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, if you lived in South Australia, really, this kind of thing makes a hell of a lot of sense at the moment. You'd be paying off the little reposit box in a year, and to their credit, South Australia's paying a lot of attention to this sort of thing.
Do you envisage a situation where a customer's reposit box might need an upgrade to the software, and you offer that?
Yeah. So we're modern software is constantly being updated. So you see that we all experience that on our phones. We really run that continuous deployment activity as well. So we're constantly, almost every day, pushing out new software updates over the internet. So the systems are getting better and better all the time, I think that'll continue to happen over time.
You spoke about the reposit box communicating with the inverter.
Yes.
And I'm aware that the Australian standard for inverters has recently changed, and I think this month the new mandatory change becomes in force.
Yeah.
And part of that change is around demand response control in the inverter.
Yeah.
Does that make your job talking to inverters easier?
Yeah, so you're talking about AS4755, which it applies to also air conditioners and other loads, but they've just recently updated it to make it apply to battery systems as well. And so what that standard is it's a hardware interface. So we do offer the hardware interface on our reposit box. So really what that means is you can put a little extra module that can talk to our system, which will then influence the behaviour of the battery based on network conditions. Now, as you probably gathered, we already offer a far more advanced version of that service. So we can do the whole job that's required by that standard in software. There's quite a lot of industry resistance to that, and we are supporting, and we're doing a trial at the moment with Energex using what's called DREDS, demand response. It stands for demand response device, enablement device. So we are doing a trial on it at the moment. We will offer it, but I don't know that it's going to supplant the kind of technology we're talking about today, because it's really an older, more expensive to implement, less capable standard than what's available already on the market.
We're going to have to wrap it up there. Luke is able to join us at the pub down the road. Go to the foyer down the ramp, and it's just before the first traffic lights on your right. PZD is an organisation that's run by donations from individuals, so it's not linked to any politics or business pressures, and those people are called baseload supporters, and they're very important to the organisation. Nights like tonight are possible because of baseload supporters. If you feel that would be a good thing for you to do, we'd be very happy to talk to you about that. We have some Zero Carbon Australia plans for sale on the table just outside, and some Energy Freedom home books. That's a blueprint on how to make your home not only more energy efficient but much more comfortable to live in. You can catch up on the discussion group YouTube recordings and download the slides from the BZD website. You can also download podcasts and interviews with Luke on the radio podcasts section of the site. And of course, everyone's aware that the All Energy Conference and Exhibition is on this week at Jeff's Shed. The next discussion group is on Monday the 7th of November. We don't have to shift it this year. The speaker will be Michael Lord, who's the acting CEO of BZD. He'll be presenting progress on Zero Carbon Australia project plans. Michael is the lead researcher on the Industrial Processes Plan. It's the last major section of the Zero Carbon Australia plan. And Michael would just like to say a few words on how BZD is going at the moment. If you would like to pop down, Michael.
Head at the back.
No worries. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks, you. Yeah, I was brought on by BZD about 6 months ago to be the manager of research, and then the CEO left, so now suddenly I'm acting CEO as well. We're advertising for that job, so if anyone fancies a new challenge, look it up at ethicaljobs.com. Next month I'll be talking about industrial processes. So industry is a massive contributor to climate change and emissions, and very little discussed. Just take something like cement. It contributes 5 or maybe 8% of world emissions, the manufacture of cement. So it's a big area. Also, if you've got expertise in this area, material scientists, chemicals engineers, or just this kind of brain that can help out, we've got a team of researchers looking at it, so I'd be really interested in hearing from you. Thanks. Hope to see you next month.